العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد المبعوث رحمة للعالمين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ومن تابعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين رضوان الله تعالى عليه وعليهم أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. رب يسر ولا تعسر وتمم بالخير. رب زدني علما رب زدني علما رب زدني علما. اللهم أيدني بروح القدس. اللهم إني أبرأ من حولي وقوتي إلى حولك وقوتك. اللهم أيدنا بتأييد كلمتين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Today we're going to be focusing on Salah, the prayer itself, the importance of prayer, the conditions and requirements of the Imam or the person leading the congregation in the prayer, as well as the differences of the Imam and the person who is behind the Imam in prayer, and the conditions and requirements, as well as some of the ahkam and rules of the Hanafi Madhab of the prayer itself in congregation as well as in solitude. So first we begin with the importance of prayer in Islam itself. So as we all know, it is something that's well known among the Muslims that prayer, salah, or at least the 5 daily prayers which are compulsory upon us, these 5 prayers are among the Bunya al-Islamu ala khams, or the 5 pillars of Islam. These five prayers are among the 5 pillars of Islam, and not only that, they are among one of the foremost of these pillars. And so what this is saying is that the prayer in Islam is something that a Muslim should focus on, and it is something that upholds the religion, and it is something that brings a person closer to their God and makes them more God conscious, etc. And there's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ where he says the difference between a disbeliever and a believer is the prayer. The difference between a disbeliever and the believer is a prayer. The prayers, excuse me. So this is saying that the prayer holds so much emphasis on the religion that it is among the major differences between somebody who believes in Islam and the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His messenger and somebody who does not. And so imagine, woe to the Muslim, woe to the person who deliberately neglects their prayer and deliberately abuses the prayer and constantly does not act upon the prayer. This likens them to the disbeliever. And in fact, some or many of the Shafi'i scholars, they say, if a person deliberately, constantly abuses the prayer and does not pray, and this is done intentionally on a day-to-day basis without any excuse, then this person has left the fold of Islam. However, in the Hanafi Madhab and some of the other scholars, they say that this person is still a believer. However, this is one of the great sins and something that should be avoided. But this person is still a believer as long as that person believes that a prayer has been prescribed to them, but they still constantly abuse it, although they still believe that it is one of the commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another well-known hadith that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, and many of the Muslims they believe in and they affirm, and many of the Muslims know of this hadith, is as-salatu miftah al-jannah, that the salah, the prayer, is the door, or the key to Jannah, right? And so how would a person expect to enter a place without the key? And so if a person does not pray, how would they acquire the keys to Jannah? Hasha wa min zalik, may Allah protect us from this. And the prayer is a means of expiation of the sins. It is a means of forgiving of the sins. And it is a means of getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And is a means of veiling a person from the sins as well. Praying your 5 daily prayers, it veils a person from sin and protects them from bad, right? And so now we go on to the more technical issues of praying in congregation, praying the imam and who is rightful to be the imam in a congregation, etc. So first and foremost, the person who is most rightful to be imam or the leader of prayer is the person who has the most knowledge about the religion in this group, right? And so there's a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, he says that the person who is most rightful to lead the prayer is the person who is most well versed in the Quran, meaning they have sahih recitation, they have correct recitation, and this is followed by the person who is most knowledgeable of the religion. However, the scholars, they codify this and they say that in the Prophet ﷺ's time, the person who was most well versed in the religion was also the person who was most knowledgeable in the religion as well in that time, right? So then the scholars, they said that we liken the more knowledgeable person above the person who has sahih recitation. So again, the person who is most rightful to be imam is the person who is the most knowledgeable of the group, right? And then this is followed by the person who has the most sahih or correct recitation. And this is not to say that a person who does not have sahih recitation can lead the prayer, as this is in the Hanafi Madhab as a makruh tahrimi, right? It is something that's very, very disliked and is the closest thing to haram. But the knowledgeable person, since they are knowledgeable, it's likewise that they would have the sahih recitation as well, right? But it is not a sin, let's say, it is not a sin for a person who is not the most knowledgeable of the group to lead too, right? So the person who has the most right is the most knowledgeable, but it's not a sin for somebody else to lead in their place. And it is important to note that the imam of a designated masjid or a designated area or place has more of a right over anybody, regardless of how knowledgeable the person behind the imam is, because this is their designated duty, right? They're the imam of this masjid. They have the right to lead the prayer. Okay. So that's one issue that has been tackled, right? And we reference this to Maraqi al-Falah Sharh Nur al-Ida, which is one of the great books of Hanafi fiqh. And then we come to the topic of the differences between the imam and the person behind the imam, as well as, what the imam should do in the prayer, how they should act, how they should be dressed, etc. Right? And the person, the imam, it is obvious that the imam should have their awrah covered, and they should be wearing their best clothing, their good clothing, and they should not be obviously in a state of janaba. This is something, the prayer will not be accepted if they are in a state of janaba. And they shouldn't have a trimmed beard that is less than a fistful, right? So the Prophet ﷺ it was a sunnah to have a beard up to the fistful. So if a person intentionally trims the beard or shaves the beard less than a fistful, that this is something that is disliked. However, it can be looked after. It's something. This is a different topic for a different time. But it is preferable that the person that is leading have a beard up to the fistful, and that it is not trimmed below a fistful, right? And so some of the differences between the Imam and the person that is behind the Imam is that it's known that in the Hanafi Madhab that you're prescribed to have an intention of the tongue that affirms the intention of the heart. So you're supposed to have an oral intention that affirms the intention of the heart, right? And so the difference between these two intentions is that the Imam will say, Ana imamul liman hadara wa man yahduru, and the person who is behind the Imam will say, Iqtadaytu bihadha al-Imam, right? And there are many misconceptions actually where people will mix and match between different madhahib and different schools of thought and put them into one prayer. For example, in the Hanafi madhab, a person who is behind the Imam should not recite the surah as the Imam is reading it. For example, you have the Imam reciting Surah Al-Fatiha. The person behind the Imam should not recite Surah Al-Fatiha along with them. Likewise, as the surah that comes afterwards, the Imam should recite the surah that comes afterwards, and the person behind the Imam should remain silent in these two periods of time. So in Surah Al-Fatiha, we believe that if the Imam recites it, and this is sufficient upon the Muslim, and the person behind the Imam should not recite it along with the Imam, as well as the surah that comes afterwards. And it does not matter if the Imam is reciting it aloud or if it's in silence of the prayer, right? And so some of the rules of prayer is that for a male, when you do the takbir, it should be, the hands should come up to the earlobes, and it should face the direction of the qibla, your palms. And the same thing for a female, except the hands should be on the bosoms or the chest, and it should be faced directly in the qibla as well, right? And for a male, the male should have their arms wrapped around their belly button area. So it should be a little bit above or on the belly button area, or it should be a little bit below. And as for the female, it is a different positioning, and it should be on the chest, right? And 3 fingers should be placed upon the wrist, and the 2 fingers should be cuffing this part of the wrist during the prayer. And many of the people, actually, there's a lot of confusion that some of the people will say that, there is no difference between the positioning of a female and a male when it comes to prayer, especially when it comes to sujood, and especially when it comes to the sujood and the sitting positions of at-tashahhud, etc. But we believe in the Hanafi madhab especially that there are, right? So the sitting position of a male is different from a female, because the male sitting position actually is a little bit harder to imply, and the female sitting position is a little bit easier on them, so the salah is easier. As we know, the females are a little bit more fragile in their demeanor and a little bit more fragile in their physique. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it easy upon them in prayer to have these different positionings, right? So these are some things. And then you have the issue of, this is more of a technical issue, in which some people, they'll say that, there is no such thing as the 4 schools of thoughts, etc. We follow the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his sunnah, and his Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's word in the Quran and the sunnah. However, this is something that we should avoid, because these school of thoughts, they do not go against the sunnah or the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. However, they make it more easier on us, as these scholars who have codified the text for us and made it easier for us, and have given their interpretations and have devoted their entire lives to the Quran and Sunnah and the religion. These scholars, they have made it easy upon the layman person, upon the general public, to follow these rulings without having to devote their lives to the religion, without having to go to the extraneous studies that these scholars have gone through. This is like saying that we go directly to a person who, a person goes directly to the medicine, by avoiding the doctor. That's what it's like. So does this make any sense to you? Would a person who has a disease or a sickness or an ailment, would they go directly to the medication without consulting with their doctors first, without the doctor prescribing what they should do and putting them into their own hands? This is something that could cause harm upon the Muslim, and especially in the case of Islam, it is a very thorough religion, and a person may fall into great confusion and may interpret something wrong, and this may cause a great harm to them. And not only that, there is a subject on fiqh, a principle of fiqh called tatabbu' al-rukhas, right? And tatabbu' al-rukhas, the actual definition of it is following a person's own whims or their own desires. And doing tatabbu' al-rukhas is something that is sinful, this is by ijma'atan ala ummatihi. By all the scholars, they say that tatabbu' al-rukhas is something that is sinful upon a person. Okay? So, tatabbu' al-rukhas is a person taking what they choose and what they want from any of the four schools of thoughts, or any of the schools of thoughts for that matter. Let's say, for example, you're following the Hanafi Madhab, right? And you know that in the Maliki Madhab, that praying in the position of sadl instead of qabd, sadl meaning with the hands to the sides, instead of qabd with it being wrapped, you choose to pray in sadl without a proper excuse or explanation, and you're doing it out of your own whims and your own desires. This is something that is tatabbu' al-rukhas, and it should be avoided at all costs. Why is that? Because this makes a person, instead of following the commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and instead of following the word of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it makes them follow what is most easy to them, right? So you're following what you choose, and not really what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prescribed, because you're choosing what is most easy upon you, right? And the religion is something that has constraints. It applies constraints upon a person, and it makes their ego smaller, as so they could reach the title and the station of ihsan, meaning excellence, and this requires a person to give up their own desires and their own whims, or their own ego. And if you follow deliberately between these four schools of thought without any good reasoning, and pick and choose wherever or whatever you want to follow without any good reason, this is going through what is most easy upon yourself, and what is most easy upon your soul and heart, and what is most easy upon you, instead of following the religion itself with the intention of pleasing your Lord. Instead, the intention becomes pleasing your own oneself, because you're following what is most easy upon you. With that being said, so we've established that following or picking and choosing from any of the four madhahib without any good reason or without any good explanation is something that is wrong and should be avoided at all costs. But if there is a person whom they have good reasoning for this and a good explanation, then it is allowed for that person to follow a single rule that goes opposing of their madhab or their school of thought and goes towards another one. Let's say, for example, in the Shafi'i madhab, we know that the feet of a woman is awra and it should be covered. However, in the Hanafi madhab, this is not the case. The feet of a woman is not awra and it does not have to be covered. If you say, for example, there is a woman following the Shafi'i madhab, and this person lives in a very, very hot area, in a very, very, very scorching hot area, let's say it's a desert, for example, and in the hot summers, this person has to cover their feet with thick socks, right? And this causes blisters and great pain upon them and sweating, and it causes great discomfort upon them. Then it is allowed upon this person to follow the opposing rule of the Shafi'i school and follow the rule of the Hanafi school. So there are exceptions to the ruling of tatabbu' al-rukhas, right? So back to the topic at hand of prayer, we've established that the prayer is something that is incumbent upon every single Muslim to follow, and it is something that has to be done by every single Muslim, and the person who deliberately abuses this action is someone who has indeed transgressed and oppressed themselves, and they have likened themselves to a disbeliever, and they have missed the opportunity to have in their grasps the key of Jannah, and they have missed the opportunity to forgive, to have their sins forgiven, and among this are many other bounties in this place. Secondly being, in the Hanafi Madhab, the differences between the person who is behind the Imam and the Imam, we have made these clear. For example, the Imam has to wear good clothing and have their awrah covered at all times, and have sahih recitation, and it is recommended for them to be the most knowledgeable of the bunch. And the Imam of a designated masjid has a right over everybody, regardless of who is knowledgeable in behind them, to lead, right? But it is not sinful for a person who leads as opposed to, someone who is more knowledgeable than them. This is just something that is prescribed and is something that's recommended. And also the differences between the Imam and the person following the Imam is in the intention. Remember, iqtadaytu bihadha al-imam is something that is said for the person that is behind the Imam, and the person that is leading the prayer is ana imamu liman hadara wa man yahduru. And then along with that, you have the issues of reciting the surah. When the Imam recites this is something the Hanafi madhab that it is not prescribed. One thing I forgot to mention is the raf'ul yadayn. We see a lot of people these days, regardless of what school they follow, they'll practice the raf'ul yadayn. And we believe in the Hanafi madhab, in the school of the Ahnaf, the raf'ul yadayn has been abrogated, and it is not something that should be taken anymore, right? And the raf'ul yadayn is the constant takbirs after every rak'ah. Let's say, for example, you're going raf'ul yadayn, or you're going into ruku' raf'ul yadayn. This is something that's not found in the Hanafi madhab, and we should stay away from this as well. One other thing to mention is that when a person is in ruku', we see a lot of people, they have a hunchback, but it is better for them to have a straight back. And our shuyukh, before our old shuyukh, our scholars, they would say that when a person is performing the ruku', they should have a straight back, as to which, if you put a cup on their back, the water in the cup will not spill. And so these are among the things and the differences and the way that a person should perform the prayer. And we know that tatabbu' al-rukhas, or choosing from your own whims and desires between the four schools, or any of the schools for that matter, without any good explanation to this, is something that should be avoided at all costs. But there are exceptions to the rulings, and a person should follow the madhab that they are most knowledgeable in, and the madhab that they've been brought up with, unless they have a good reason to oppose this. And we should not mix and match between the madhahib, and we should not directly take from the Quran and Sunnah, as this is something that is very dangerous, and the scholars have made it easy upon us to follow their codified texts and follow their teachings and their interpretations, because they have put their entire lives to this cause of Islam, and they are better than 1,000 of us would not even match one of the scholars of the Salaf, or one of the early predecessors, or one of the four Imams. And these scholars are mujtahids, and they have the right for ijtihad. And we, as laymen and general public, should have taqleed upon them and have a following towards them, right? And may Allah make it easy upon us and keep us in khair and لطفا عافية. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. لا أشرف النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وآله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.